Hey, this is the World Advice Channel 2. What I want to talk about today is the topic of why communism ruins everything, part 2. So for this video, I'll explain in a simple and straightforward way why communism sucks and should never be embraced. And not only that, I hope to enlighten people who are not familiar with this topic in a simple and straightforward way so they can understand it. So now that I mentioned that, let's get started. So when it comes to why communism sucks, the first reason why communism sucks for this part 2 part of my video series why communism sucks is it simply comes down to the fact that communism prevents success being a form of revenge. You know, as the saying goes, success is the best form of revenge type of scenario. Okay? Because the truth of the matter about communism, okay, that communism has been guilty of for years, for that matter, okay, is communism has been very good at taking advantage of vulnerable and, let's be honest, maybe even weak nations, and has been selling them a dream to people. And not just selling a dream to people, you know, that is obviously not true, just simply, as I was saying before, taking advantage of vulnerable people, you know, at nations where literally like 1%, and we're talking about decades ago, and even up to maybe even now a little bit, if anything, like nations that literally their literacy rate is in the single digits, which in itself is already a massive red flag when it comes to how educated a nation is, things like that. Communism has a way of just simply taking advantage of nations. And as long as you're anti-American or just anti-imperialism for that matter, America as well as Europe, they automatically just pop up and take advantage of people, and sometimes they even come uninvited. They're extremely annoying and have always been annoying. But the main point here is to not talk about my personal feelings about that organization, you know, let alone its followers for that matter, you know, for that matter. What I'm here to talk about is how it prevents people from getting success as revenge. Because as the saying goes, you know, to elaborate further on the point I was getting at before, they have a saying that success is the best form of revenge, okay? Instead of success being considered a form of revenge, most people's idea of a form of revenge is something dramatic, somebody going in a place, killing everyone and this and that, and so on and so forth. But in the modern day world, as I'm certain no one is surprised by, that is not really as possible as it used to be. This is 2025, let alone the 21st century. This is not fucking 1500 or 1600 for that matter, okay? Let alone pretty much every century going back from the 20th century onward, as far back as humanity ever existed. Life is not like that anymore. Violence is not the best option anymore, okay? And even if violence is still an option you can use in some cases, it's been proven that success is the best form of revenge because it literally prevents people who talk the most shit about you and terrorized you, you know, from being able to continue talking shit and pointing you down and so on and so forth. And it shows the people that oppress them for who they are. It makes it possible for people who once great allies to start turning on them. You know, like let's just say as a certain nation is oppressing another nation, and that nation that they once oppressed becomes very successful. It makes it much easier for people to demonize the nation that were once the oppressors and have people, you know, from all across the world, let alone even their allies, as I was saying before, turn on them. And trust me, no but human being in the world wants to feel like the whole world is turning on them. And that is what success does. It makes people who were once either apathetic to you, or even think to yourself, oh god, this guy's a straight up loser. Whatever one of those two options people have whenever someone is at the bottom of anything for that matter, whether it could be they're considered a loser at the local school they're a part of, or in the case of something as important as this, a nation, you know, this same way of thinking can apply to it. But when they become successful, obviously they start realizing, the enemies at least realize that, oh my god, people actually care about this person. He's not a loser I thought he was, and everyone starts turning on them, and so on and so forth. So in short, success really is the best form of revenge, okay? But communism, you know, prevents that from happening. because it just simply finds vulnerable nations, whether it could be Cuba, Venezuela, let alone pretty much every Latin American nation that has ever existed for that matter, let alone all of the other nations that make up the rest of the world for that matter, that are pretty much non-white nations. It prevents them from being able to see the success they want to see, because politically, economically, socially, or biggest one of all, economically, communism does not work. Whether you call it communism or socialism, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work because it doesn't encourage people to have buying power. And when people do not have the ability to have buying power, it prevents them from obviously making their nation become more successful and more prosperous. Not to mention, communism, socialism is an ideology that believes that the government should have extreme power, which, surprise, 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 leads to abuse of it and has people being terrorized and mistreated and so on and so forth, which I think surprises no one for that matter, okay? So the truth of the matter is, communism prevents people from, who of course are made up of a nation that of course went through a lot from some form of oppressor, or let alone maybe even the leader of the nation who mistreated them, from being able to truly get the best form of revenge, which is success. It's undeniably the best success, okay? You could get your revenge and just end up being pretty much insignificant for the rest of your life. Imagine having a situation, where not only did you get your revenge by fighting against them, or maybe even doing it diplomatically, of course, by diplomatic means like South Africa, for that matter, not which they use nonviolence to get their freedom, and then you actually become well successful. Can you imagine how embarrassing it would be for that group of people that used to oppress you and mistreat you? I don't think they would feel very good at all, for that matter, okay? So communism gets in the way of that because its way of thinking doesn't work, and it just makes nations that already were miserable become even more miserable and more miserable and more miserable. So in short, communism prevents one of the greatest possible joys of life, which is revenge. And it prevents it from happening because communism is stupid, it doesn't work, and it never will work. And that's my first point. Now, my second point, when it comes to why communism sucks, let alone it ruins everything, is due to the fact that communism prevents nations, great nations for that matter, of people for that matter, or just general nations for that matter in general, from really being able to get out of it. Look at China for that matter, okay? China's pretty much going to be communist forever. No matter how you look at it, with how much Chinese people are unhappy and dissatisfied with their government, they're pretty much going to be communists forever. Because the truth about communism, especially in the modern age we live in, the technology that these communists have the ability to use, whether it could be China or any other nation, has improved drastically than ever in human history, okay? And the things that would have been impossible years ago, such as being able to track rebels who were hiding in the woods and were able to practice for years on end without having to worry about, of course, being able to, of course, surprise, being caught for that matter. So, of course, without the fear of being caught, you have to learn enough time to train and then pretty much fight back against the oppressive regime, which pretty much is something that helps sum up Chinese history, overthrowing one regime for another regime. Once that regime becomes corrupt, they get rid of it and they get a benevolent regime, and then when that benevolent regime becomes corrupt, they rebel against it. And one of the biggest ways they're able to rebel against it was hiding in the wilderness, like I pretty much said, training for God knows how long, and then going back there and, of course, overthrowing that corrupt regime, which pretty much sums up Chinese history, okay, for that matter. And not even Chinese history, but a lot of other nations, but specifically Chinese history, okay? That is the truth of the matter. But now try doing it nowadays when we have technology that literally has cameras everywhere. They can make a rock look like a camera. They can make anything look like a camera, okay? For that matter, they can have a bird, and it's literally a camera. So how the hell do you do that anymore? That is the truth of the matter. For crying out loud. So once you do that type of stuff, for that matter, how the hell are people going to get their freedom? And even when people get their freedom, it just creates a shit show. You know, it's very hard for people to figure out who's going to be the next leader. There's a lot of infighting and so on and so forth. That is the truth about communism. Communism ruins everything it touches. Okay? And not only is that my last point, that is the best point for this video, okay? It destroys everything it touches. Whether it could be the first thing I mentioned for the first um point for my first video, such as that it pretty much economically doesn't make sense, or it could be the last point I mentioned just now. Communism is an ideology that's a destructive one and should never be embraced. And that is the truth of the matter for this ideology. And the fact that it's being embraced in places like America and the West in general is very sad, and it should never happen. And hopefully it is put to a stop because it will destroy everything. So anyway, this is my video. I hope you enjoyed it. And just remember, if you like this video, thumbs this video up and hit the subscribe button. And this is all I have to say. And simply put them out. Bye.